Another loaded show coming your way on the 49ers Report by Chat Sports. I'm Chase Sr. Here's what we're getting into. Brock Purdy injury update. Purdy talking about what went wrong against the Baltimore Ravens during that Christmas massacre. And we have a crazy Niners stat that we're going to unveil, so stay tuned for that. And then on the back end, we're taking questions from some of our loyal subscribers. Let's begin with the latest around Brock Purdy's injury. He did say on Thursday that he's going to play against the Washington Commanders despite suffering stingers in his non-throwing shoulder in back-to-back weeks against Arizona and against Baltimore. That's why he was held out of that game at the end of it against the Ravens, and that's why Sam Darnold came in. Here's Purdy on explaining the injury and what happened. He said it's been good, got a lot of treatment done on it, worked out the soreness in the whole shoulder and trap area, but it feels good. I'll be good for this game. Nobody said anything to me, didn't know until I got it against the Ravens again. I guess the nerve is more susceptible to stinging again, but with treatment, time, and recovery, I'll be good to go. Everyone is different. I was fine the entire game. Then that one sack, I landed on it, just right for it to go off, but the feeling came back, and it's part of the game. It's definitely part of the game, and hopefully Purdy continues to get that treatment all throughout the week. I'll tell you this, I got my first ever full-body 90-minute massage this week. It is life-changing, and hopefully Purdy is feeling as good as I am after that massage with that stinger, and hopefully this isn't something to be serious and to get back on track here that doesn't really affect him moving forward. Because if he gets sacked again and lands on that non-throwing shoulder and it flares up again with the playoffs quickly on the horizon, then yeah, there are reasons to be a little bit concerned. As for what went wrong against the Ravens, against the number one defense, giving up the fewest points in the National Football League, with the most sacks in the league as well, Purdy threw a career high 4 interceptions. And earlier this week, we did a lot of breakdowns on the show about what exactly happened with the picks. I think one of them was an awful throw. The other 3 were really fluky plays. And in fact, I like the honesty. And I like what Brock Purdy had to say about throwing some of those turnovers. He said, toward the end, I was searching for those big plays to get back into the game rather than playing the position. I feel our game plan was good, what we wanted to get done. It was the execution part where I didn't do a good enough job. I read that quote and I'm like, yeah, people lose sight of the fact that Brock Purdy is in year 2. He's 16-4 as a starter in the regular season. He's still an inexperienced player. So he can learn from this, and all quarterbacks have bad games, ladies and gentlemen. He continued by saying, toward the end, he made those mistakes, and then he said, our mindset was good. If we want to go to that next quote, I fell short in terms of making it happen. Watching film, there were plays to be made. We felt good. We were right there, and we had things dialed up. I just didn't execute well. If we see them down the road, we'd be excited to play them, but we're taking it one day at a time. For me, it's a great learning experience and not buying into what's going on around me and what's being said. It's about being in the moment, make the right decisions, protect the ball, not to say I'll be perfect moving forward. It's football. You're not perfect. Lastly, people can say things and you can buy into the narrative. You need to have that chip on your shoulder, put your head down, go to work, show teammates week in and week out that you're that guy. Everything that Brock Purdy said there is what you want to hear from a quarterback. I messed up. I'm taking accountability. I can learn from this. Going back and watching the film, I know what to change. He admitted to forcing the issue a little bit, which I thought was a little bit surprising because for the first time in a long time, you saw Brock Purdy pressing a little bit. But despite the loss, why I'm not really hitting the panic button with Purdy or this Niners team. The one thing I am concerned about playing from behind and then adding another thing to that if I can is that the Ravens played a lot of zone defense. So that kind of neutralizes what Shanahan likes to do with running a lot of the pre-snap motion. But still, against the number one defense in the NFL, Brock made some excellent throws, tight windows, layering footballs in there, touch, accuracy, anticipation. The Niners had explosive plays. And I put out a video earlier this week that took off on social media with like 500,000 views where I said, this is why I'm not panicking. The Niners had more yards per play, more passing yards, more rushing yards. And people were ripping me saying, the Niners got their asses kicked. To me, that's casual talk. That's just looking at the box score, looking at the scoreboard, and not understanding what actually happened. I thought the Niners played well in stretches of the game, but when you turn the ball over 5 times, you're not going to beat anybody. And people were saying, all those yards came in garbage time. False. The Niners were on pace for 500 yards at halftime. It was a close game at halftime. If Brock Purdy doesn't throw that red zone interception on the first drive and they take that early lead, are things different? I think so. In the third quarter, Baltimore went on a 17-0 run and things unraveled. Why? Because of turnovers. And the defense, Chase, they gave up 7 straight scoring drives. They stink. When you're playing against Lamar Jackson and an explosive offense that has diversity to it, that can run it and throw it, and they're taking over around midfield, your defense is put in an impossible position. And the Ravens were gift-wrapped opportunities to put points on the scoreboard. So I'm not hitting the panic button. Furthermore, from what I said earlier this week, because of these reasons as well. As for that crazy Niners stat, preach. The Niners have a chance this year at a 4,000-yard quarterback in Brock Purdy, a 1,000-yard running back in Christian McCaffrey. He's already over that number. A 1,000-yard wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk. George Kittle is 9 yards away from 1,000 yards receiving at tight end. And Deebo Samuel, some work to be cut out for him, needs 164 yards to be a 1,000-yard receiver as well to join Brandon Ayuk. The last team to do this was the 2004 Indianapolis Colts. And Peyton Manning actually won MVP that year. That's the historical significance of what this Niners team has been able to do. If you're still confident in the Niners, show us and let your voices be heard by hitting that thumbs up icon and liking the video. Your questions on the other side, but first, 49ers Report today is sponsored by Prize Picks. $100 deposit match with the best DFS app, Daily Fantasy Sports that is, and the largest independently run Daily Fantasy Sports app. Here's how the game works. You pick 2 or more players and you choose more or less on their projected stat lines. For instance, these are the selections that I liked for Thursday Night Football. Joe Flacco's been a great story, more than 199.5 passing yards. Myles Garrett, chasing Defensive Player of the Year, more than 0.75 sacks. Trevor Siemian, more than 0.5 interceptions. $5 to win $40 right there. So the payouts are awesome, and you can win real money. PrizePicks.com/CLNS, code CLNS, Daily Fantasy Sports made easy. Let's get to your questions and your super chats. Lore, how can we attack the Commanders' defense? The Commanders aren't good in the secondary, and I don't think the Commanders are all that good at the safety spot. The concern here, Lore, is at defensive tackle, because the Commanders are really good at defensive tackle. Daron Payne is a hell of a player. So the talent there with Washington combined with Aaron Banks being banged up and the issues that the Niners have along this offensive line, those are concerns. Lyle, good to hear from you once again. $10 super chat. We're putting you on the Niners surfboard right here. Hey, Chase, hate to say it, but I'm getting worried that the Niners Super Bowl window is coming to an end soon. What do you think with some free agency and contracts? You know, it's interesting that you say that, Lyle, and I understand why you feel that way, but let me tell you why you shouldn't be all that concerned. This is an organization that has drafted really well since 2017, and they are very fiscally responsible and creative with managing the cap and being able to give out some of these large contracts while still rounding out the roster with a lot of depth. This Niners team is one of the most talented in the NFL, and they're paying a lot of money to a lot of premium players. And you think about the contract extensions that they've given out over recent time. George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa. Like, those are big contracts that they've given out. But you look at Brandon Ayuk. He's 25 years old. Eric Armstead's 30. Aaron Banks is 26. Nick Bosa's 26. Jair Brown is 23. Spencer Burford's 23. You look further down. Dre Greenlaw's 26. Javon Hargrave's 30. Jawan Jennings, 26. Kyle Juszczyk, 32. Older side. George Kittle, 30, but tight ends can play for a while. Deommodore Lenoir, 24. Jarrell Luter Jr., 23. Christian McCaffrey, 27. Jake Moody, 24. You know, some of the marquee players on this team. Deebo Samuel, 27. Mooney Ward, 27. Fred Warner, 27. Trent Williams, concern, 35. You got to start to invest in that offensive line. Chase Young, if they bring him back, he's 24. So this team is actually somewhat young with players still in their prime. So I'm not overly concerned about the Super Bowl window ending very soon. But I will say this, they do have to capitalize soon because you're playing deep into the season now with 3 NFC Championship games over the last 4 years, and you hope you're making it to the Super Bowl this year. That's a lot of football over the last 5 years, and that does wear on you. And what does the NFL stand for? Not for long. Things can change in a blink. Black Mask, $10 super chat. Just me, but I do not want to be playing against a division rival in the playoffs. If we beat the Rams, it will A, clinch the number 1 seed given we beat the WTF team. That's the Commanders. Love the creativity right there. And B, kick out the Rams maybe. Let's take a look at the NFC playoff picture if we can, because I don't think the Rams are going to miss out on the playoffs. They're sitting pretty right now in that 6th spot. Now, San Francisco wouldn't have to play them until deep into the playoffs potentially, but you're right, Black Mask. Having to face a team like Los Angeles, which has won 5 of 6, 3 times in a season, is a difficult task, and you might have to do the same thing with the Seattle Seahawks, but the Niners did that last year with Seattle. And what happened? I mean, they beat the brakes off of them in the wild card round. The Rams are the team that I'm concerned about, but I don't think that a Minnesota and Atlanta, Green Bay, New Orleans, they're going to make a bunch of headway to oust the Rams. They have the Giants and the Niners to round out the regular season. Black Mask, $10 super chat. Thank you for that. EC, do the 49ers still have an opportunity to win Super Bowl 58? Yes, they do. You know, I just went through the roster with some of the marquee players. This team is loaded. And despite their loss against the Ravens, I mentioned why I'm not overly concerned. The odds makers aren't overly concerned, EC. They still have the Niners as the odds-on favorites to win the Super Bowl. Big Bo, next up. Lyle Collins is out there, and he can play. Why not bring him in? It is interesting that no team has signed Lyle Collins, but to me, has to be a red medical flag, where he suffered that torn knee last year after signing with the Bengals and was struggling before the knee injury. And he's had some workouts with some teams, and nobody has added him. He's obviously clearly not recovered, or maybe he's just not going to be the same player. But as a backup, there are worse options out there for sure. Niner Faithful Fantasy, $10 super chat. Who is the best wide receiver on the Niners between Deebo and Ayuk? I prefer Deebo because there is something different about him at wide receiver and across the league. Deebo, I'm going to the Rams game. Have fun at that Rams game. That's going to be a blast at Levi's Stadium. I think that Brandon Ayuk is the better wide receiver than Deebo. But I do think that Deebo is one of the most unique weapons across the entire National Football League. While I think that Ayuk is a little bit better route runner, he's not as much of a gadget guy. He's not as great at picking up yards after contact or after the catch as Deebo, but he's still really good in that area. He's a really good blocker downfield. I like the catch radius. I like the hands. I think he's a better deep threat than Deebo. I think you have to scheme up Deebo a little bit more because Ayuk has great footwork as a route runner and his route tree is a little bit more diverse. So if we're talking about wide receiver, I think Ayuk is the better pure wide receiver. who's the better overall player and weapon, you might go with Debo. Matt Keller, another real one. Thank you for your service, my brother. Seems like the offense wasn't operating like they usually do. Something seemed off. Well, here's what happens when you turn the football over 5 times, 2 of them coming in the red zone, a couple of them coming around midfield. They moved the football. They were on pace for 500 yards at halftime against the number 1 defense in the NFL. More yards per play, more passing yards, more rushing yards. Christian McCaffrey had more than 100 rushing yards against the number 1 defense. And then you had Ayuk and you had Kittle at more than 100 receiving yards. Don't tell me that all those yards came in garbage time when they didn't. The Niners had about 250 yards at halftime. But when you turn the ball over 5 times, you're not going to win any games. When you lose a turnover battle in general, you lose between 70 and 80% of the games at the NFL level. When you're -5, everything else becomes impossible, especially against a team like that. How about them Niners? Nothing to do with this season. Do you think that Frank Gore being on the staff as an advisor might lead to the Niners drafting Frank Gore Jr. this year? You know Frank will lobby for it. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they drafted Frank Gore Jr. or if he didn't get drafted, they ended up bringing him in to be a part of this team. You know, they might look to move on from Elijah Mitchell because he's way too brittle. So at that point, you have Christian McCaffrey, you have Jordan Mason as your 2 backs. I don't think they have a lot of trust in Ty Davis-Price, but he'll be under contract. You want some competition? You want an RB3? You want an RB4? It'd be a cool story for sure, but they're not just going to take him just because of the Frank Gore connection. They're going to take him if they think that he's a good player. Comment real one if you made it this far on the show. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, and make sure you subscribe for daily shows on the Niners.